Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. This video is primarily going to focus on the numbers that we see for Asia. So if you're interested in Asia, please stick with me and watch this video. If Asia is not your interest, then this might be somewhat interesting to you, but the techniques I'm going to show here are not quite as easily applicable in some of the other regions. We might be able to do Europe like this. Africa is going to be a lot more difficult to do like this. It's possible, but it's difficult. I'm not sure I have the time, frankly. But Asia, Asia is probably the easier of the big three regions. So. The explanation I'm trying to give you is the distribution of the holes in the region. And in previous years, we have a tremendous fellow called Xarthisius who hosts some data. He actually helps gather the data, and he's enabled over the last couple of years, he's enabled the collection of data from the SEAC website. SEAC is the government website. It's open source data in that we're allowed to check case by case. But several people, starting back in I think 2014 or 2015, found ways to scrape that data from the database, from the web page. And over the years, we've played a little bit of a game with the government about sort of them trying to stop us doing this in some way, while still making the data public. They were only concerned about the impact on their servers of lots of people scraping data. I don't believe for 1 minute they expected to have this data as private. But anyway, we've found ways over the last few years to always gather that data. And Xarthisius has represented that data in a way that we can visualize it and understand what it means. So what I'm showing you right here is for fiscal year 2019, DV2019. This is a visualization of the Asia region showing case numbers, or basically percentages. If you think of this as a percentage bar. So in this case it's from case number 1 to 200, 201 to 400, but how many cases per 100 are either holes or actual cases, and then as the year goes on we can see how many cases are issued, how many are refused, and so on. But the thing that we need to know at the beginning of the year, like right now about Asia, what we'd like to know at least, is the distribution of the holes. We know the holes exist, but seeing the distribution of the holes is kind of important. And this particular region has two limited countries, Iran and Nepal. So there's essentially three groups of people. You're either from Iran, chargeable to Iran, you're chargeable to Nepal, or you're chargeable to what I call the rest of Asia. And in this particular year, the rest of Asia continued when Nepal firstly was cut off or limited, and then Iran was limited at some later point in terms of the distribution of numbers. Now, when I'm talking about limited, I'm not talking about a prediction about the highest number. I'm talking about cases that were actually issued. Right. So if we look at, for example, the visa bulletin for, we can have a look at September. If we look at the visa bulletin where we have the all of the country information, we can look in Asia, and as I've pointed out before, Iran has 6,000 selectees, 6,001. Nepal has 3,801, and no other country gets close to that. A few people in the last few days have asked me strangely about Sri Lanka, treating it in the same way as Nepal. Nepal is not equivalent to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is not equivalent to Nepal. Sri Lanka is not a limited country. That is just got a lot of selectees this year, as has Cambodia, and other countries have done okay. Yemen's got these, etc. So we can talk about the way that these cases are distributed, and over the last few days I've been gathering data, as you know, doing a survey to figure out where the cases are. Right, and we're pretty confident now, or I'm pretty confident, that Nepal cases are limited at around about 10,000. And I think Iran is limited at around about 18 to 19,000. I don't know that 100% yet. I'm waiting for more responses from Iranians, and I could be wrong on this, but the data I'm about to show you, or the visualization I'm about to show you, assumes that they are limited at about 19,000. They're definitely limited, that we know, but where exactly they're limited, we don't know, right? So what I did was I've prepared a spreadsheet, and I'm going to show you some data here. That pretty picture was the point. I've shown you this data before, which is for the region of Asia. How many selectees are there according to the visa bulletin? What's my guessing derivative rate? And that's an approximation based on 2020 data. And therefore, how many cases we're likely to have? 14,436 cases. That's my guess. At that time, I was guessing 35x as the highest case number assigned. We now know that their case is up to 38x. So it goes a little bit higher than I expected. And we also have information about the quota and some other years there, right? But in terms of Asia, we can then figure out, okay, well, if 25,408 is the total for the region, Nepal takes 3,801, Iran takes 6,001. That means the rest of Asia, including all of those other countries, Yemen, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, all of those other countries are in ROA, rest of Asia as I call them. And using a derivative rate that we can kind of assume for each country, or group of countries, we can get to the number of cases that should be allocated for each of those countries, right? So if there's 3,801 people in Nepal, and if their derivative rate is 1.6, and I'll come back to you. I'll come back to that in a moment. Then we would have 2,376 cases, right? Now, 1.6 is lower than these other countries. There's a reasoning for that. If you study the selectee data over the last few years, and I've brought it up for us here, you can go and check how many selectees are in each year, right? How many entries are received in each year. So, for example, Nepal in 2016 had 664,000 entries, with 426,000 derivatives on those entries, meaning a total number of people of just nearly 1.1 million people. That's who entered the lottery, right? And we can see 2016, 2017, and 2018 data. That comes out at about 1.6 derivative rate across those 3 years. I wish I had more current information, but they haven't published this information yet. They tend to publish it in 3-year blocks, so I'd expect over the coming months to see a block of data for 2019, 2020, and 2021, but we don't have that yet. So the most modern data we have on the number of actual entries into the lottery for Nepal, for example, are these numbers here, and that's how we get to a starting derivative rate. In the same way, we can do the same thing for Iran. If we have a look at that, we can see how many entries they've been getting, right? They get more entries, and it's interesting that they've been allowed to go further to 6,001. I think that's because there's an expectation that not so many Iranians will be approved as we will see Nepalese, on a case-by-case basis, partly because of the ban, partly because of security measures that have been there for years. It's not all about the Muslim bans, etc. There are some hurdles that Iranians go through in terms of security background checks, because Iran as a country doesn't cooperate well with the USA. That's fundamentally the reason, and because there are obviously terrorism concerns that again have been in place for years, not necessarily to do with Trump's weird thinking. Okay, so now we understand the derivative rates and we understand how many cases or how many people we have and therefore how many cases. And these are approximations. Obviously, I don't know this for a certainty, but I've based the Nepal and Iran on the previous results there, based on the number of entries, and calculated those two numbers. And assuming my 14436 number is accurate, that would mean that the rest of Asia has 8,902 cases. Again, these numbers are approximations, guesses, so I can't be 100% sure of that. Now, the next bit of this is to figure out if Nepal, let's say, is cut off at 10,000, how many hundreds do we have in 10,000, right? Now, what I'm trying to get to, you'll probably understand, is a cases per 100 number, or a percentage distribution between the three blocks of data I've got there: Nepal, Iran, and the rest of Asia. So essentially what I've figured out is, let's say we assume that the cutoff for Nepal is 10,000. That's 100 times, it's 100 blocks of 100. If we assume that Iran is cut off at 19,000, and again, I should be careful with these terms. I loosely say cut off, and people will assume that to be the cutoff that is in place at the end of the year. I should really say the word limit, because it's about a selectee limit that's applied during the allocation process at the beginning of the winners. It's not to do with the final result, right? So just bear that in mind. So anyway, let's assume 19,000 is the limit that's going to be applied for Iran, or was applied for Iran. So, and then the rest of Asia go up to case number 38,000. So that's 380 blocks of 100 cases each. That means if we assume these numbers are right, and if we assume the number of cases are right, that for every 100 cases, while Nepal is involved, there would be 24 cases for Nepal out of 100, representing representing something like 40 people, but 24 cases, right? And then for Iran, there'd be 17 cases every 100. And they would go up to case number 19,000, representing the 3,100 cases that Nepal should have, that Iran should have within the 6,000 number there. And then for every 100 cases that we see throughout the whole number range, because none of the other countries are limited in any way, we should see approximately 23 cases per 100 for the rest of Asia. That means that if we add up those three numbers, we've got a starting holes rate of about 36, and we can now visualize how the numbers would break down. So these are the numbers that you need to think of: 24%, 17%, 23% for rest of Asia, and then 36% is the holes number. So then this is where we get to this sort of picture. Let me zoom out a little bit. That's zoomed a lot. Right, okay, so this is, just to give you an idea of the scale, this is 1 to 100, in other words, a percentage, and this is up to case number 38,000, so I'm assuming that cases go all the way up to 38,000. The yellow color here is holes. Nepal cases would be like here, up to case number 10,000, and 24% of the cases in each block, in each 100. And then Iran would be 17 cases, but going up to 19,000. And the rest of Asia would be 23 cases, or 23%, going up to the full 38,000. So what that allows us to see is that as Nepal, for example, gets exhausted in terms of their numbers, so above 10,000, there would be a drop in the number of actual cases per 100. There would be an increase in the number of holes. We start off at 36% of holes, and then after Nepal is exhausted, we've got the 36% and the 24%, so we have 60% of case numbers would be holes, and then when Iran goes, there's another 17%, so that means there would be up to 77% would be holes by the time we get to the rest of Asia numbers up here, after about 19,000. So what that means is the speed at which the visa bulletin can progress is much faster in later months than it is in the beginning months, right? So Nepal and Iran are both going to be limited because you've already seen in the first visa bulletin there's a limit on the visa bulletin that slows down progress in Nepal and Iran. That's because, particularly for Nepal, the majority of their 3,800 cases are all interviewing in one particular embassy. So to avoid all of that activity happening in big chunks, they restrict Nepal to be slower so that they can space this work out over the full year, right? And so there will be that slowdown. And I think this picture sort of makes that a little bit easier to understand. They don't want to do all of that work in the first 3 or 4 months of the year. They want to space that out over the 10, 12 months that we would expect to have. Another important point about this picture is that as we stand today, Iran is blocked by an additional ban that that is specific to Iran and some other countries. We also have in this block, the rest of Asia, we have Yemen and Syria, who again have bans imposed on them. So there are people within these groups, Iran and the rest of Asia, that can't process their cases. Now, at the moment, with the immigrant ban, until the court hearing tomorrow, none of these people could progress their cases, which is why we've lost October as a processing month. But you can see the point that if Iran remains banned, then that chunk of people, that 6,000 people or 3,100 cases, whatever it is, that blue block in the middle can't process. So unless those people happen to be living in the USA or whatever, so there's a very small number of these cases that could process. And the same thing can be said for Yemen, which is in this green box. Now, that could obviously change. If that changes, and as I mentioned before, if the travel ban, which is called the travel ban, you can call it a Muslim ban, it's version 3 now. That's been approved by the Supreme Court. It's been allowed as constitutional. So if Biden were to win the election, I would hope, but I'm not 100% certain, I would hope that ban would be removed pretty early on next year in January. Excuse me. And that would give Iranians a chance to process their cases. But as I mentioned earlier, there are security concerns and just slow processing concerns in Iran that mean that an Iranian case, particularly if there's a male selectee, an Iranian case takes longer, so there's a period of time after interview called administrative processing, or AP. And for Iranians, if you're male in particular, you can expect that period of time after the interview to last several months. Could be 3, 4, 5 months. So if you don't have an early interview, then the chances of getting approved reduce massively, because if you run out of time at the end of the year, then you're out of luck, right? While you're sitting there on AP. So even if the travel ban is removed, not all Iranians will get the chance to process their cases, and there will be some cases lost due to the time delays. So out of 6,000 people selected for Iran, I'd expect with the travel ban, a few hundred would get their cases, a few hundred only would get their visas. With the travel ban removed, we might see perhaps as many as 2,000 people getting their cases, so getting their visas. So that's a difficulty that we have to think about. And then we can think about, with that assumption, we can begin to think about where is the overall allocation of visas going to go. We know that Nepal is probably going to take 3,500 visas or so, maybe a bit more, 3,700. could be in that range, which means that there's 5,000 visas left after Nepal has taken its chunk. There's 5,000 cases left, or visas left within the quota, which is to be shared between the rest of Asia and Iran. So if Iran takes 2,000 of those, let's say 5,000, then there would only be 3,000 visas left for distribution within the rest of Asia. If, on the other hand, Iran remains blocked, then there's 5,000 visas for the rest of Asia. This group of people here represents about 15,000 people. Now, 15,000 people can't get happy from 5,000 visas, even if Iran remains totally blocked. So I think there is going to be a cutoff. It seems in most circumstances there would be some sort of cutoff, because I would expect Nepal to proceed quickly and fill its quota, fill the 7%. I would expect it to get very close to that, if not hit it. And those cases go before Iran and before the rest of Asia, and therefore this is the first bite of the apple, if you like, and the overall quota for Asia is 8,600 visas, right? So you can see that out of 8,600 visas, probably 3,600 goes to Nepal, 5,000 will be left for Iran and Asia. If Iran remains blocked, 5,000 between the rest of Asia, 15,000 people in this block, although there's about 1,500, about 10% of those remain blocked by the travel ban. So if the travel ban affects Iran, it will also affect Yemen, for example, and reduce the numbers here. But still, there is a danger zone for high case numbers. I don't know where the danger zone will be. I don't know where the cutoff would be at the end of the year, but I think it's likely there's going to be a cutoff. So if you're in the sort of the high case number ranges, towards the 38,000, you obviously have more risk than if you're in the lower number ranges. People continually ask me, here's my number. My number is, I don't know, I'll just make it up. My number is Asia 6,000. Is it a high number? Look, really you don't need to ask that question. A low number is number one. A high number is 38,000. If you're in this range, okay, you can presumably figure out that if you're at this end of the range, you're a low number, and you don't need to ask me about your number. If you're at 38,000, then you've got a high number. If you're something close to 38,000, it's also a high number. I don't know precisely where the cutoff will be, but if I personally had a case number, I would be probably nervous from case numbers of, 15 to 20,000 and up, because we really don't know what will happen here, particularly with the travel ban. We don't know at the moment about the political situation, who will win the election, and so on. So there's lots of factors, as I've explained in a previous video. You need to understand those factors, and because of those factors, I'm not going to get into predictions. But even if I were to try and predict based on the mathematics, we're still a year ahead of the time when this will finish. It's very difficult to say. If you ask me for a weather report for this afternoon, I can tell you it's going to be sunny. If you ask me for a weather report for the same afternoon in a year's time, how do I know, right? I don't know even though I can predict the weather in the short term, I can't predict the weather in the longer term. And in the same way, there's a lot of things that could happen over the next 12 months with the visa bulletins, with DV lottery, with the political situation, with the pandemic, with the various bans, etc., the lawsuits, and it's just not possible to predict, what's going to happen next. Okay, so we just need to be thinking about the situation. But anyway, I hope this picture hits home with you and you understand what I'm getting at, and that yes, there is a chance of a speedier visa bulletin increase later on once we get Nepal and Iran out of the way. But at the same time, there's also going to be, there's going to be a lot of people who would like those visas in the rest of Asia. and there's a limit on the number of visas that can be given out. Okay, I hope that was interesting to you. If you liked the video, please let me know. Give me a thumbs up, like. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and that you're getting notifications. Click the bell when you subscribe, and make sure you can get notifications on new videos. So hope that was interesting anyway. All right, keep well everyone. Bye bye.